White text over video of past events. Logo, Cultural Access Collaborative. Professional Development Series presents Service Dogs Welcome, hosting guests with working animals. At left, presentation slides. At top right, mini video of presenting speaker. Below, an ASL interpreter signs.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Why don't we get started? Thank you all, and thank you for joining us for Service Animals Welcome, hosting guests with working animals, presented today by the Cultural Access Collaborative. My name is Carly Englander, and I'm a steering committee member here with the collab. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white woman with short brown hair and wearing tinted glasses.
And hello, everybody.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jen.
My name is Zhen Heinnemann, and I am also with the steering committee. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a white person with tortoiseshell glasses, large black headphones, dark dyed hair in a mushroom cut, and I'm wearing a yellow sweater in a room that has white walls. And I'm Carly.
Thank you. For those of you who are not familiar with the Cultural Access Collaborative, our mission is to empower Illinois cultural spaces to become more accessible to visitors with disabilities. There are 4 primary pillars central to our work, and those include free professional development workshops, an accessible equipment loan program, an accessible event calendar, and our growing statewide network.
Zhen? Accessibility is a priority for us here at the Collab. And so our program today includes real-time captioning provided by Efficiency Reporting, as well as ASL interpretation provided by First Choice Interpreting. Please use the Q&A submission button on the Zoom channel so that you can submit your questions. And then if you'd like to chat with the hosts for tech and access support, please use the chat button to do that. And if you'd like to view your captions in a separate browser, you can do so using the stream text link included in the chat. We encourage you to submit all of your questions during the presentation using that Q&A feature, and we will have a Q&A section at the end of the panel discussion. If you have any issues with accessibility, please reach out via the chat. If you find the chat pop-up bothersome, you can turn off the show chat previews by clicking the caret next to the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom screen.
Okay, thank you all again for joining us. This program is particularly near and dear to my heart, as I myself have become a service animal handler within the last year. I've had my dog Heinnemann for just about a year, and we are learning and growing as a team. So I'm truly excited and really interested in learning more about this topic. So without further ado, let's get started. Next slide, please. So we wanted to start off by giving some just general definition information. Service animals are defined as an animal that is individually trained to perform a task for the benefit of an individual with a disability. That can include physical, sensory, psychiatric, intellectual, or another mental disability. In contrast, an emotional support animal provides companionship, relieves loneliness, sometimes helps with depression, anxiety, and certain phobias, but they are not specifically trained to perform a task to assist a person with a disability. Next slide, please. Thank you. The laws, as just a general information, would be according to Titles 2 and 3 of the Americans with Disabilities Act, in situations where it is not obvious that an animal is a service animal, there are only 2 questions that are allowed to be asked. The first being, is this animal an animal required because of a disability? And the second is what work or tasks, is the service animal been trained to perform. Some important notes to distinguish here is the owner of the service animal does not need to provide any information or disclose their disability, and the facility or the business is not allowed to ask for documentation or for any type of demonstration of the task for that service animal.
Excellent. So generally, folks, in regards to policies, businesses and nonprofits that are open to the public, as well as any state, local, federal government agency and bodies, must allow service animals to go most places where the public can go. So this is true even if there is a no pets policy in those businesses, they still must allow service animals. And as we continue to go through this information, you might be looking for resources, and we will have a bunch of resources available to you, but you can find the ada.gov resources available at ada.gov/topics/service animal. And then check the chat later for our resource link.
All links and resources listed in video description.
Wonderful. So today we are going to be joined by two panelists, Pam Berman and Kelley Frake. If the both of you wanted to turn on your video and join me, if you could both introduce yourselves right now. Thank you.
Pam at top left, Kelley at bottom left.
Okay, can you,
Oh, go ahead, Pam.
sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Pam.
Okay. My name is Pam Berman. I am an alumni of Guide Dogs for the Blind. I'm do outreach for them on a part-time basis. And I am a white female. My pronouns are she, her. I've got brown hair, brown eyes, and I am accompanied here by Gumbo. Come here, buddy. I figured he could say hello. Come here, Gums. And he says, forget it. He's laying down. He's chill, because he knows he usually does not get introduced when I'm out and about, but I thought because we are on Zoom, I would do so.
That's okay. Thank you, Pam. If Gumbo wants to join us later, he is
Yeah.
welcome.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Thank you.
Kelley?
Thanks, Carly. My name is Kelley Frake, and I'm here from the Great Lakes ADA Center. I am a white woman. I've got long, medium brown hair, and I'm wearing a green button-down shirt today. And my pronouns are she, her.
Okay, thank you both. For the scoop on today's presenters, you can check out their bios, which will be linked in the featured presenters document that you can find in the chat. We do have several questions that have come up, and we've grouped them into three major categories, which would be the perspective of a service animal handler, the legal perspective, and finally, policies for cultural institutions. So if we do not get to your question, we will be having a Q&A at the end. So no worries, you can always put your questions into that. But for now, why don't we get started? I wanted to first discuss the service animal perspective. So Pam, if you wouldn't mind. I know I have had my dog for a year, and she has changed my life in so many positive ways. Would you be able to share maybe a bit about your relationship with your dog?
So I had two children before I got a guide dog, and I took on I took on working with a service dog, working with a guide dog, the same way I took on parenting. I didn't know what I was doing when I took on the parenting part, but my kids are pretty awesome, and so is my guide dog. So I just navigate through life, kind of like I've got one of my kids with me. Only this a kid that actually listens to me all the time, or most often. You know, I sometimes get caught up and I want to say, well, he's human, so you know, we make mistakes, but I guess he's not human. But it's hard to remember that sometimes. But in navigating, that's what I do. A lot of self-talks, you know, like where can I go with him? Well, wherever, you know, is okay for humans to go is okay, for him to go with me. You know, we go to the gym on a regular basis, and all over the place, restaurants, hotels, museums, wherever I go, he could go, except, you know, certain places, like, you know, if I were having surgery, I wouldn't bring my kids in with me. So,
Well, absolute, very good points. And we're going to touch on some of that
right.
going forward. But kind of building off of that a little bit, you had mentioned it a bit before. Generally, we know that you shouldn't be talking to or interacting, petting a service animal when they're out and about. Could you maybe share a little bit more as to why that is? Why shouldn't people be petting a dog, petting a service dog, talking to a service dog, etc.?
Okay, for the same reason why when I'm working, like right now, people should not be calling me. I apologize for that. I had my phone on do not disturb, but it was one of my favorites that got through. But it's distracting. And it's distracting for my dog if somebody is interacting with him. You know, when I'm at the gym and I'm working out, that's not the time to be petting my dog. I always tell people it's fine to ask. Definitely ask. If you want something, ask, but then be prepared for my answer. If I can, I may let you. If I'm in a hurry, if I'm, you know, working out and have someplace to go, I'm sorry. So it's the distraction. And, you know, I lots of times have people tell me, oh my God, your dog is so well behaved. Well, yes, because he's a professional, number one, but number two, because we keep up with his professionalism by consistency. If you know, I keep going back to the gym because, you know, a lot of people come up to me and they want to pet him, but you know, I don't want him walking around the gym. It's not safe for him. And not everybody loves dogs. Not everybody thinks it's cute or funny for, you know, to be interacting with the dog. So if I'm consistent on how I interact with him, he'll know. And it's just simple.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that I even got a sign that I have put on Hayden's harness that asks, please ignore. And I would say it works maybe half the time. It's a lot, but not always. So yeah,
Right.
generally some very good points to keep in mind.
Absolutely, absolutely. I have the same sign on Gumbo's harness too, and people, I could tell, you know, I can't see it all, but when people are interacting with my dog, usually I can tell, you know, where their voice is coming from. If my dog is at my feet and their voice is coming from low down, and they're reading the sign that says do not pet, oops, and then sometimes they'll stand up, you know, but I get it. I get people really love dogs. So I try I mean, I try to educate and not get angry, but it is frustrating.
I mean, absolutely. Definitely points to keep in mind, and I can agree with that. It can be a bit frustrating. I know that we covered this a bit in the definition, but I'd love to hear your perspective on the difference between service animals and an emotional support animals, and why that is such an important distinction to make.
Because emotional support animals are not trained to do anything. They're just cuddly, sweet animals that their owners love. I get it. I mean, Gumbo is my emotional support as well. He was not trained for that. It's just natural. I mean, as my friend, you're my emotional support. But I just, when I hear the word companion, I think friend. And those dogs are not trained and can be distracting. And I see a lot of things in my head through my children. As you know, when my kids were little, I could see a little bit. So I picture these emotional companion dogs like sticking their tongue out at my dog and just making faces, and it's just distracting.
Yeah, thank you, Pam. Thank you. I do truly appreciate your insights, and I do want to circle back to you in a little
Sure.
bit. But for right now, I'm gonna switch our conversation a bit to the more legal side of things. Um, Kelley, if you do not mind, I do have a couple questions for you.
Fire away.
Absolutely. So, the first one is, what is and is not considered a service animal under the Americans with Disabilities Act? And kind of a follow up to that, what about service animals in training? Are they covered?
Great questions. So I think we kind of covered the gist of what a service animal is, but I'll go over it again. So service animals are dogs or miniature horses that have been individually trained in work or a task that mitigates a person's disability. So I'm going to break that down a little bit. Dog and miniature horse. Those are the only two species that are recognized under the ADA to be a service animal. Any other animal, whether it's trained or not, is not going to be considered a service animal. It's not going to be protected for public access under the ADA. When we're talking about individually trained worker task, obviously there are the ones that people are familiar with, guide dogs for people who are blind that assist with navigation, that would be their task. But there's many other types of tasks that a service animal can be trained to do. I've heard of animals and seen animals that are trained to do allergy detection. So for example, if people have a severe nut allergy or something of that nature, they can have a service animal trained to detect that in food that they might be buying or consuming. There's people with PTSD who have a service animal that is task trained. So again, not emotional support, not comfort, but is actually task trained to do things like remind them when to take medication. If they have a psychiatric episode, they can be trained to go get help for them. They can be trained to get them to a safe location. There are seizure alert dogs that are trained to detect an oncoming seizure, and it can even provide care to a person during a seizure. So they might go over under someone's neck to protect their head from hitting the ground, or they might be trained to go get help. So those are just a few examples of what a service animal could be trained to do, but that's the key. They have to be task trained, and it has to be related to a disability. And then regarding service animals in training, this is actually an area that the ADA doesn't cover directly. It's left up to the states. So that's why it can differ, especially when you're traveling from state to state with a service animal in training. In Illinois, you have the Service Animal Access Act, which is your state law, and then the white cane law. So those are the two animals that are, so the two laws that cover service animals in training specifically in Illinois. And they do allow people with disabilities or service animal trainers to access places of public accommodation, businesses with a service animal in training.
Okay, thank you. Wow, those are really amazing and great points. Okay, well, moving on. Pam had kind of touched on this a bit, but we do recognize that there are some places that service animals are not allowed to go. So where can't service animals go, and why can't they go there?
Definitely. So under the ADA, service animals are generally allowed to go anywhere their handler's allowed to go, unless the animal's presence would result in a fundamental alteration. And this is a term that's used a lot in the ADA. It's a defense that businesses can use as an excuse for why they can't provide this as an accommodation, or in this case, why they can't allow a service animal. So fundamental alteration basically means allowing the animal to be in this space would fundamentally alter the nature of the program, service, activity that you're trying to provide. I'll give a couple examples. So for this group, I'm going to give the example of zoos. So what we found and what Department of Justice has said is that where the animals on display in a zoo are the natural prey or natural predator of dogs, for example, if it's a service dog, those service dogs can be restricted from those areas, because you're going to run into the issue of those animals either becoming overly aggressive, or in the case of the prey animals, getting very anxious and scared and potentially hurting themselves trying to get away from the dog. And again, we're talking about an animal here that is totally well behaved, not misbehaving. It's just the presence of the animal alone would cause that issue in those sorts of spaces. Now, when we're talking about fundamental alteration, and especially zoos, this doesn't mean that you can have a blanket policy that says no service animals whatsoever. You still have to allow the person with a disability to access all other parts of the zoo that wouldn't result in that fundamental alteration, that dangerous situation. So for example, they could still access the reptile house. They could still access areas where the animals wouldn't care if they saw a dog. That's where I think it's really important to be proactive. If you have special situations like that, make sure that you have staff that are trained in screening and asking the 2 questions of people who come in with a service animal and letting them know, hey, just so you know, you're more than welcome to visit all areas of the zoo except for these places, and here's why.
Yes.
Yeah, and then I know Pam mentioned surgery. Those are some other areas. So food prep areas typically don't allow service animals. It's under the food code. They're not required to be in the food prep areas. They can still go in every other part of the restaurant, just not the food prep area. And burn units and operating rooms, which are typically, they need to be 100% sterile environments. Those are other places where it would be a fundamental alteration for a dog to just be. Again, perfectly well behaved. We're not talking about behavior, but just for a dog to be there would be a fundamental alteration.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic points. Thank you. We're talking a lot about the animal themselves, but let's shift focus a little bit to the person with the disability.
Mhm.
What are the responsibilities for the person who's using a service animal?
Absolutely. Number 1, supervision and care of the animal. It is not the responsibility of the business to take care of the animal, to feed the animal, to provide water, shelter. They don't have to supervise the animal in any way. So that's always going to fall, that responsibility is going to fall on the handler. Control of the animal is the other responsibility of the handler. They have to make sure that their animal is under control when they're in places of public accommodation. And then something I also tell people who are looking to get a service animal is they have to be willing and able to answer the 2 questions. So is the animal required because of your disability, and what work or task is the animal trained to perform? Those would be the 3 main things: supervision, care, control of the animal, and then being able to answer those 2 questions.
Okay. Can I ask a follow-up question to that? When you say
Absolutely.
control of the animal, what would you consider to be not, what is considered, I suppose, legally not considered to be under control? Are there examples of that?
Definitely. So when we talk about being under control, again, we're not talking about your typical pet obedience training. Like Pam was saying, these service animals have to be trained to go into any location and be next to their handler, not barking, not being distracted from their work, so they can't be going up to other people. Even if they're on a leash, they shouldn't be 20 feet away sniffing around at the floor while their handler is trying to do something, I don't know, buy a product, whatever it might be. So that's sort of an example of under control. Like I said, they shouldn't be barking repeatedly. Now, of course, if the animal is performing a task, like we talked about seizure alert, for example, some of those animals are trained to bark, but they're trained to bark to alert to an emergency. So if someone has told you, yes, this is my service animal, and then 10 minutes, 30 minutes later, suddenly you hear excessive barking from in the store, check it out, because it might be a medical emergency that's taking place. That's another reason why I like businesses, especially to ask that second question, what work or task is the animal trained to perform? Because you could be there to help someone if they have a medical emergency. So if they tell you my dog is trained to bark to alert me to a medical emergency, they don't have to necessarily specify what kind of emergency, but then if you hear that barking, you know this person needs help. So that's a good reason to ask that second question as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And circling back a little bit to another point that you had mentioned, which was the rights of the business itself. What are they and are they not allowed to ask? Would you maybe kind of elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So businesses are allowed to ask those two questions. They can't ask for any personal medical information. They're not entitled to ask for documentation of any sort. What I tell people is that there is no documentation. You know, there are places out there that will claim to provide a patch or an ID card or like, you know, pay us $60 and we'll send you a vest for your service dog. None of that is legally recognized under the ADA. None of that turns an animal into a service animal. So it cannot be requested. It cannot be required. And then they also can't require someone to have their animal perform the task on cue. Couple of reasons for that. Obviously, number one, if I'm just going to the store to buy milk with my service dog, it's not performance time, you know. That's number one. And number two is some service animals can only perform their task in an emergency or when there is a cue to perform that task. So it might not be, you know, if I'm not having a seizure right now, it's not going to be performing its task on cue necessarily. So those would be things that they really can't ask and can't get into. But I would say when it comes to the rights of the business, absolutely, if an animal's not well behaved, if they're not housebroken, you can have the animal removed, and you should have the animal removed because, like Pam said, it's a distraction to trained service animals. It can be dangerous for people who have trained service animals when there's an animal who's not under control or not behaving appropriately. Now, I will specify you have to allow the person to obtain goods or services without the animal present, but you can have them remove the animal. So for example, if there was an animal that's not well behaved, I would tell the person, hey, I'm sorry, you're going to have to remove the animal. You're welcome to come back at a later time, make an adjustment, however your business works or however your cultural center works, to try and have that person back to receive goods or services, but you don't have to allow that animal.
Wonderful. Oh, thank you so much. Definitely things I'm going to be keeping in mind for myself. Shifting focus just slightly here. You had mentioned it a little while ago. I know you were saying the patches and the vests, and I know everyone's seen those things, seen the patches and the vests for service animals. And that's probably one of the biggest questions we have gotten is how do you tell if an animal is a service animal? Like, do they need to wear vests, harnesses in order to be considered a service animal?
Great question. And I get that a lot too. What I always tell people is that it's the training and the behavior that defines and protects a service animal under the law. It has nothing to do with what they're wearing. What they're wearing is irrelevant. I can go on Amazon tomorrow and buy a service animal vest for my dog. That doesn't mean my dog's a service animal. That doesn't mean they're trained to go into public places. And that doesn't mean that they've been task trained to assist with my disability. That's why asking the 2 questions is a really important screening tool to be able to make sure as a business that you're not allowing in emotional support animals. You're not allowing people in who have a pet that they're trying to bring with them, because most people who have a trained service animal know how to answer those questions. They know that their service animal is required because of a disability. They know what tasks their animal's been trained to perform. Now, a lot of times I will hear that people will answer that second question by saying things like, well, I need my animal. I need my animal is not a trained task. So that would not be something that you'd have to allow in unless they were willing to specify why they need the animal and if it's a task related thing. The other thing I would mention, again, gets back to the behavior. So you ask the 2 questions, they're able to answer it. You allow them in. Again, if at any time that animal's not housebroken, it's not under control, it's not behaving properly, you do have the right as a business to have that animal removed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm certain that that's all going to be very helpful information. And I'm also certain that there's going to be a lot more questions in the legal perspective in our Q&A for sure. But I do want to move things forward just a little bit and move on to cultural spaces and talk more about policies. So we're going to put a timeout in the legal perspective for a moment here and move forward to talk more about the cultural spaces. So this question, I suppose, is more for Pam than for Kelley, which would be, can you tell me as a service animal handler, a user, what is your favorite like cultural space and like that you enjoy visiting? And would you say that they have a good service animal policy?
I don't know that I have a favorite. I mean, I live in Chicago. We have so many wonderful ones, but for me, it's when I'm greeted with kindness is what I really appreciate, is when people ask me the question, I'm always, because I can't see, I'm always listening to people, to their voice and how they're coming across it. And if they're kind, and even if there's somebody that works there that doesn't know or understand about service animals, I appreciate kindness, but I really appreciate when all the staff is educated on service animals, and the questions that Kelley mentioned could be asked, because to me, it seems pretty obvious. My dog is very appropriate, but I get it. Some people just don't know. Kindness goes a long way, though.
Absolutely. I would absolutely 100% agree with you. It definitely makes a huge difference when you're visiting a space. What would you recommend to creating service animal policies for both the staff and the public? Do you have any recommendations?
Talk to you. Go to yeah. Just read up on the ADA's website. I mean, there's lots of material there to be had. I mean, we are accessible to all cultural venues to speak to people. I mean, if you want an audience, be a welcoming host.
Wonderful. Absolutely. Kelley, would you have any additional insights to add?
Yeah, I think I'll build off what Pam is saying. In terms of your policy, just make sure that it's as incorporated as possible. So you don't necessarily have to create a separate service animal policy for every situation. You probably already have policies in place that would apply to situations that might come up with service animals. So for example, you might have check-in policies or screening policies or something like that. Just make it a part of your screening policy and training for your staff that if someone comes up with an animal, you have, and I've seen where businesses laminate the 2 questions and they'll leave it with who's ever doing check-in, who's ever at front desk, whatever it might be, and have them trained on how to ask those 2 questions, have them trained on the fact that emotional support animals are not covered, so they don't have to access the building if it's an emotional support animal. The other thing I would mention is removal policies. So if you do have an instance where you have, and I'll say in quotes, a service animal that is perhaps maybe poorly trained or not well behaved, and you can include that in any incident reporting policies you might currently have. So if you do have to do a removal, make sure you're documenting. That can help in case of a complaint that's filed. So you have on record, yes, we asked the 2 questions. This is what they told us the animal was trained to do. The animal wasn't housebroken, let's say, as an example. And so we had to have the person remove the animal. That's why the animal was removed. That can be very helpful to have those reporting policies in place. And then the only other thing I would mention, I think I saw it in the Q&A as well, is have a policy for how to handle other conditions that can rise to the level of a disability. So for example, allergies comes up a lot. What if someone has an allergy to dog or horse dander? The main point is that the ADA says allergy is not an excuse to deny access to a service animal. That's number 1. Number 2 is you have to look at what is the best medical evidence that you have from the person saying they have an allergy. Is it just they get itchy eyes? Is it that they have a reaction when they actually touch the animal, or just being in the same room as the animal? Because if generally they're not going to be touching the animal. So if it's contact with the animal, shouldn't really make much of a difference. But you might have to ask them follow-up questions if you have a customer or someone stating that they have an allergy, to get a better idea of what you can do in that type of situation. For example, do you have to reseat the person with the allergy somewhere else? Do you have to maybe stagger it? If it's sort of like a small exhibit area, let's say, maybe the person with the service animal comes in first, takes a look at the exhibit, leaves, and then the other person can come in. It's just going to depend on that situation, but I would have training, I would have policy scenarios in place for what you could do in that kind of situation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I want to leave time for our Q&A, so I'm going to just have one more question here. I know that for me personally, when I'm visiting a new cultural space, the physical space itself is also very important. For example, things like relief areas, or if like relief areas for dog to do her business, or is the space particularly loud or busy, things along those lines. Would either of you have any recommendations as to what would make a positive experience for both the person with a disability and their service animal?
I was not too long ago at the Goodman Theater, and I did not say that I had, when I ordered my tickets, I didn't mention my dog. I had too many bad experiences, not at the theater, but it was still there, riding Uber. You didn't tell me you had a dog, and or a restaurant that didn't want to service me. So sometimes kindness goes both ways from the handler as well. And I went to the theater knowing that my dog was allowed, but I didn't mention it. And the seat that they gave me was not the best place for him to be, because it was just real narrow. And I was told, next time, please let us know so we can accommodate you. And I mean, I just think that's wonderful that they take that into account. I mean, that he's a working guy, he should be comfortable.
I love that, Pam. This is Kelly. I totally agree with Pam. I don't think I have anything else to add other than just, I totally agree. I think what Pam said about being kind and incorporating, just understanding that you will have patrons who do have service animals. You will have patrons who do have disabilities, and incorporating them into your policies and procedures is no different than incorporating people without disabilities, and showing courtesy and customer service and respect.
Thank you both. Absolutely. I truly appreciate both of your insights, and I would hope you're able to stay a bit longer. We will be having our Q&A session.
Thanks, Carly. This is Zhen speaking. I'm happy to give you a break and get some much needed water. So stay with us now, everybody, for the live Q&A. I've got Kelly and Pam still here, and you have submitted plenty of excellent questions here for us to share. So some of them have been partially answered. I'm gonna get to the ones that are just have a little bit more nuance to kind of go.
Sure.
So a few people were asking questions around what makes you feel most comfortable about a venue, or what in the physical space are you looking for a venue to have, ideally, that would make you feel included and make you also want to travel there. So folks are asking, are there other environmental features aside from a relief area, maybe water? What else would you be ideally looking for to feel like that was a great space for you to visit?
I mean, for me, I don't have him drinking on the job. I mean, it's not alcohol, but it's, you drink, you got to go to the bathroom. So I usually take care of all of that. I mean, again, for perhaps Kelly could answer for other disabilities, but I know as a blind person, not being able to see, it is huge for me to hear the person that's talking to me and that they're knowledgeable about where I need to go to communicate to me clearly. Because I mean, as far as me directing my dog where to go, if I go to a theater that I've never gone to before, I need you to give me a little direction on which way to go, left, right, forward, backward, whatever. And kindness is huge. And not only the person who creates, the policy or whose ever theater it is, employees must know that service animals are welcome, and the protocol. Have your employees all be on the same place with service.
That's excellent, Pam. Thank you. And that transitions us really well into a question that was asked from a few other people about what practices you recommend to effectively train their customer-facing service. So I'm hearing you say that folks being able to be ready to give you directions and have a clear sense of where you should be going, where the area that you and your dog are most welcome and going to be comfortable in is great. I've also seen from somebody, like, what do you think of the idea that maybe when folks with service dogs get checked in, they get some kind of visual identifier for the rest of the staff, so everybody isn't asking you, have you ever experienced that? Does that seem like a good idea? Or any other training tips for frontline staff that you're gonna give?
That kind of makes me a little uncomfortable, because I feel like I can't see, but you can see. So I don't know, my dog's pretty big. How can you, what would I need to identify myself?
I know Yeah, this is Kelly. I agree with Pam. And also, while a business can ask those two questions and do that screening, there's no need to necessarily other that person or, proclaim to the entire world, this person has a disability or this person is different. Obviously, yes, like Pam said, they're going to have a dog. If they have a service animal, they have a disability, but there's no reason to label them, especially because if they have a dog and they're already inside, let's say the main area of your center or business, it's assumed at that point they've already been screened. That's where I would say if we're talking about training processes, your screening has to happen way further back at the door. It shouldn't be happening when someone's already in and about to be seated or walking through an exhibit or something like that.
The only other thing that I could think of that hasn't been mentioned is employees that are afraid. Kelley mentioned people that have allergies. A lot of people are really afraid of dogs. I get that, and I'm very respectful of that. And I will try to keep my dog's face away. I'm thinking mainly like in a vehicle, like an Uber or Lyft, but I think it's really important to just have basic knowledge of service dogs, which are not the same as a pet dog. I mean, pet dogs are not trained in the same way. A guide dog is never going to jump up on you. I mean, should not be jumping up on you. Again, that's inappropriate behavior, and that's on me to keep my dog under control. But people should know, don't be afraid. They are trained, and like what I did when I introduced Gumbo, I did it for two reasons. Number one, because we're on Zoom, and it's kind of fun to see a dog. I would never do that in person. I would never even say his name in person. All my friends, they teased when I got him. I couldn't stand the name Gumbo. I thought it was goofy. And they said, what do you care? You always make up a name for your dog anyways, because I don't want people interacting with him. So that's really important for people to know as well. Don't be talking to the dogs. I've had people want to give me direction by saying, come on, boy, this way, this way. No, you ignore him. I mean, talk to me. If I walked in with a cane, you wouldn't be talking to my cane. You would be talking to me. So with a service dog, you need to talk to the person, not the dog, not the horse.
Thank you, both Pam and Kelly. That was great. I hear you saying talk to the person, not the horse. Don't interact with the dog. Also, I hear you saying don't other people by making visual identifiers. Make sure your staff in the space is trained to give direction to the person, knowing where they're going to go in a very clear, helpful language. And we also have a question about people that might. So Kelly, I think this one is more specifically to you when you're talking about service animals and emotional support animals. If somebody says they have paperwork or they show your staff a letter saying my dog is a service animal. I know, Kelly, you've already said there is no certification, there is no letters, but how can the staff talk to that person about if they need the dog to be removed if they're showing them a letter from a doctor saying it's an emotional support animal, right? Or what is the protocol for removing? I think aside from training your visitor staff to be polite and respectful and have directions, what is then the protocol for training staff on how to remove an animal?
I would say go to your policies and look at what would you do if a customer or a guest would violate any other policy that would require removal. So is it that you need to contact security? Is it that you need to, and this is all assuming the person isn't just willing to leave voluntarily. So would you call security? Would you have to potentially get police involved and have them trespassed? Would you potentially have to call animal control if we're talking about a dangerous animal situation? That's when we're talking about an extreme case where a person is just flat out refusing to leave. That's where you have to do those more extensive measures and have that plan in place so that your staff know, you know, if you are getting significant pushback, you have someone who is just flat out refusing to comply with policy or with the law. These are the measures we would like you to take. Now, in a situation where someone comes in and they have, you know, the vest from Amazon and they've got their doctor's note saying they need to have their dog because they need it in public places. You don't have to be mean. You don't have to be cruel. Like Pam said, it's better to be kind and show customer service and just say, oh, thank you for showing that to me. Now, is your service animal required because of a disability? What work or task is it trained to do? Ask your 2 questions, screen the person. And again, if there's, well, they're not a service animal, they're an emotional support animal, then you can politely tell them, okay, well, you know, let's say our zoo complies with the Americans with Disabilities Act. We comply with the Illinois laws related to service animal access. But unfortunately, emotional support animals are not covered under those laws. So we're going to have to ask you to remove the animal and then you're welcome to come back. And again, at that point, it's on them. If they want to leave voluntarily or if they're going to try and fight you, which can happen with some people. But at that point, you've been polite, you've stated your policy, you stated that you follow the law and that you know the law. That's the other key piece, because a lot of people get away with bringing in a pet or an untrained animal because a lot of places don't know the law, or they're afraid to say anything, or they don't want to say the wrong thing. And so they just get through, and that's what they're used to a lot of the time. So if you do know the law and you politely tell them, we know what the requirements are, we know that emotional support animals are not covered, you're probably going to get a lot further in terms of protecting your cultural center.
Thank you both. Kelley, we had a little bit of a follow-up of somebody who was saying that sometimes people sneak animals in. It's my understanding that if somebody has a service animal, they're not trying to sneak them past anyone because the dog is working and hanging out. But if they are sneaking people in, then I imagine what you just said about asking them the questions and then, you know, kind of doing all of that is the standard procedure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I noticed you have a dog. Did anyone ask you, is it a service animal? What tasks does it perform? Again, same sort of process if someone tries to sneak in an animal. And again, you know, people who have a trained service animal aren't trying to sneak them in typically. So yes, absolutely follow those same procedures. Make sure you're being polite. Make sure you're not targeting people either. That's something I see sometimes from businesses that get a little bit fed up with the poorly trained service animals, let's say, and they will start being overly observant to anyone who comes in with a service animal and basically following them around the store, the location, just looking for them to sort of slip up and make a mistake. Let's not do that. Let's not play service animal police. But if there's an issue, address it. If there's not an issue, leave them alone.
That's great, Kelley. So a lot of the legal questions we've been talking about, you've been talking about businesses and saying the, you know, word businesses or cultural institution. Can you tell us if there's any difference for government agencies or government buildings, or if that's just the same?
Yeah, so I think Carly mentioned in the presentation, under ADA, we would look at it being Title II, which is state and local governments, and Title III being places of public accommodation, which include things like, and I use business as a catch-all, but include businesses, museums, zoos, cultural centers, that would all fall under that place of public accommodation umbrella. Nonprofits fall under that umbrella of Title III, and the requirements are the same. Whether it's a state or local government facility, office, program, they have the same requirements as a Title III, so a nonprofit, a business. They have the same requirements.
Excellent. And Pam, I'm coming to you for this one. This is a double question from 2 people, and it's about, do you want to know if there's another service animal, a service dog that's going to be at the show or seated near you? And how much research do you do about a venue before you go? Do you check out their accessibility website pages? What interests you when you go to a venue if you do that research?
I usually do not do that research. And yeah, I would like to know. I don't need to know because I have total confidence in my dog's training. But yeah, it's helpful because he may react. I mean, just to look over and, I picture them, making faces at each other. So I want to know what's going on around. I mean, just like we all started out here describing ourselves. I mean, I'm good just knowing who's in this meeting. In the same way, when I'm out and about, it's nice to know if there's other dogs or a horse around. Yeah, I'd like to know. It's helpful, just helpful information. I don't need to know the breed or any details about it.
That's
It-
excellent. And
Yeah.
Pam, I'm also wondering if you can let us know, how do you think employers can better support folks that use service dogs?
Kindness, kindness, kindness. Yeah, I mean, that's key number one. Just that's all I got for you, is just consistency. I guess it's frustrating with all the emotional support dogs that are permitted in businesses. I mean, who are not trained and cause an upset and make it really difficult for me navigating. I mean, if a dog lunges or is barking at my dog, it's stressful for him. And, again, I mean, as a human, if somebody's yelling at you, a person is yelling at you, it's upsetting. It's difficult to continue. You may want to stop and, grab walk with a friend and hold on to them, sit down for a while, relax. Same thing with my dog. It's stressful if he has an upsetting experience.
Thank you. And any tips on how you think public transportation can be better for folks that are working with service dogs?
Bus drivers could speak. Uh, I think it would be really cool if there was a spot for service dogs on buses, like there is for wheelchairs. Just if the main thing is education, is for people to know about service animals and that they're trained. They're not like pets. They're not the same. And I think that's the problem. A lot of people have pets or have friends who have pets who, oh, I wish my dog could behave like that, or assuming that my dog is going to misbehave because their dog misbehaves. So, knowledge.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sure.
For both of you, how people want to know, how can they reach out to individuals who are working with service dogs or horses to get them to know that their venue is welcoming and that they are included? Is there organizations that you know of in the city of Chicago where, meetup groups, other things for both of you, where people can look to make a better relationship with folks who are working with service?
Well, I'm very aware of the blindness agencies, Second Sense, Blind Service Chicago, Lighthouse for the Blind. I facilitate the Chicago Guide Dog Group, which is guide dog handlers and people who are interested in working with guide dogs. So, and I have an email list that I send out to people.
Yeah, this is Kelly. I would just add to that, of course, the guide dog organizations, but there's also service animal training organizations out there that do specifically PTSD or psychiatric service animal training. There are organizations that will do hearing dogs for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. There's a lot of different organizations out there. And like we talked about towards the beginning, Illinois is one of those states that has adopted a service animal in training law where they are allowed into places of public accommodation. So if you want to start making your areas more welcome, and if you also want to contribute to having better trained service animals, I've seen a lot of instances where organizations will partner with training organizations to become a location where they can come. Periodically, they might bring the full group in to do a day of training. They might come in for a show. If it's a zoo, they might go through the zoo to make sure that the animals are going to be comfortable in those spaces. Because again, if you think about Pam, she's going to go everywhere she needs to go with her service dog. That could be a lot of different places, and those dogs need to be well behaved in all of those different places, no matter what's going on. And so to help with that, if you can partner with a training organization, that's a great way to reach out. And also putting information on your website about service animals. So a lot of places now will have an accessibility portion of their website where you can list your policies, you can list things to be aware of, like things to know before you go. That type of stuff would be very, very helpful. Sharing that you can reach out to staff or where you can go if you have questions related to relief areas, things like that for a service animal. Just being proactive and putting that information out there is very, very helpful and does a lot in communicating to the disability community that you are welcoming of them and their animal.
Thank you so much, Kelly. That's a great tip. And Pam, your tips are great too. What a great list of organizations that are right here in Chicago or Midwest. I have a follow-up that's related to that. And someone was asking if live performances, like any kind of live performances, have shocking elements like startling sounds or bright flashing lights. Is that going to be a problem for service dogs, and are sensory friendly performances then better for folks that are working with service dogs?
I would think that different dogs are different, like different people. So I've been in different performances and I've had staff come up to me and tell me there's going to be loud noise here, or I'm just thinking there was a concerning scene on stage once. It was just a little concerning for people, and they asked me if my dog was going to be distracted because they were using food. They were concerned, so ask. It was helpful for me to know what was going on in the performance. It wasn't a concern for my dog, but I think it's good to know. It's helpful. I mean, I saw the play Tommy, and I was told it was going to be really loud gunshot at the beginning. What was not taken into consideration was we were sitting right by the speaker, and it was not a good spot for a guide dog. I mean, it wasn't a great spot for me, but for him, he was sitting up the whole time. It was appropriate, but it was just really loud right there.
Thank you for that. Go ahead, Kelly.
Yeah, sorry, I just would add to that too. Some things that I've seen when we're talking about theater shows too, is if there's going to be a gunshot or if there's going to be a loud noise or flashing lights or something like that, I've seen theaters where they'll actually say that over the speaker before the session starts. So along with the, silence your phones, that sort of announcement, they'll
Right.
also share, hey, in Act 2, whatever, there's going to be a gunshot at this point. Please be aware, or please be advised that today's show is going to have feature flashing lights, that sort of thing. I would say doing that can be helpful. Providing it in your advertising material for the show can be helpful. Providing it on the website can be helpful. In general, when we're talking about disability, when you provide the information in as many places as possible, you're going to catch more people, just in general, because not everyone's going to see the pamphlet. Not everyone is going to be able to maybe access the website before they come. So having that audio announcement would be helpful. So having it in a lot of different places can be really helpful to make sure that the most people possible could get that message.
Agreed.
I'm going to have time for one more question. And so, Kelley, have there been recent changes to the ADA about service dogs, or, are there frequently changes to the ADA? And can you remind everybody where to find that information online?
Absolutely. There's really not any major changes to the ADA. The last major amendment was in 2010, which was the ADA Amendments Act. And then that sort of set up the service animal law that we know now. What has changed and what does cause confusion for a lot of people are the other disability rights laws that exist that also cover service animals. And I'll explain very briefly because we don't have a lot of time to go into it. But for example, there's the Air Carrier Access Act, which covers service animals specifically when they're flying on an airline. So this is where it can get very confusing because the airport itself, the building, is covered under ADA, same rules, same access requirements. Once you go to the airline and you're going to board the flight, Air Carrier Access Act kicks in, and that's why you might have an airline that has a form that you need to fill out or things that you need to submit because it's a different law at that point that's taking effect. It's like that invisible line. Once you pass through there, different law takes over. And that has been very confusing, I think, for a lot of people, because back in 2020, well, prior to 2020, they actually allowed emotional support animals to fly on airplanes. That's why you might have seen there's a big story going around for a while of the peacock on the airplane, that sort of thing. That's when they were letting emotional support animals fly. They no longer allow that after 2020. And so we still get calls about that. Why doesn't the airline allow me to fly with my emotional support animal? Well, the law changed. They issued a final rule that's not required of airlines anymore. And then the other major law that we get questions about is the Fair Housing Act. So the FHA, which does allow, it's the only law to my knowledge that allows for an emotional support animal in housing specifically. So if you have, let's say, an apartment that's no pet housing, you can get an accommodation as a person with a disability to have an emotional support animal if it's related to treatment for your disability. So for example, some people who have severe depression benefit from that emotional support animal because it gets them out of bed in the morning, gives them a routine, and it's part of that treatment plan. But that's Fair Housing Act. They can't take it into any other places other than in their personal apartment or residence. So there can be confusion around service animals and emotional support animals and other types of assistance animals, mainly because there are different civil rights laws in place that apply differently to different animals. And then for how to find out more information, I would say Great Lakes ADA Center, we are your Illinois resource for all things ADA. So if you want to reach out to us, the number is 800-949-4232. And then if you'd like to follow up, if you got questions on anything that we talked about today, anything related to service animals, I can give my email address as well. It's just K as in Kelley, and then my last name, FRAKE @uic.edu.
A slide with QR codes. All links in video description.
All right, that concludes our Q&A session. That was a great selection of questions. Thank you to all the folks that are here that asked their questions and to those that submitted them early. We hope that you enjoyed this program and that you will consider making a donation, small one. They all count to support the mission of the Cultural Access Collaborative. Even $5 makes our work more sustainable in the future. We are sharing out some resources related to this program, so check out the QR codes on the screen now or at bit.ly, the link that's in the chat in the slideshow presentation, as well as the other helpful resources that our presenters shared during today's program are in the resource link. Finally, in the chat, you'll find a link to our feedback survey. There's also a QR code currently on the screen on the right-hand side that links to that feedback survey that we'd love you to take. Please complete it and help us out for the future. Carly, turning it over to you.
Absolutely, thank you. At this time, we will be bringing today's program to a close. I'd like to thank our presenters, Pam and Kelley, very much. I'd also like to thank the accessibility service providers as well as the Collab's production team, and mostly thank you all for joining us today and offering your support to the Cultural Access Collaborative.
And stay tuned, folks. Before you leave, our next event is going to be mid-March, and it's going to be tackling big questions about how to welcome and highlight art made by and for people with disabilities. That's right, art made by and for people with disabilities. That program is going to be in mid-March, and it's going to be fantastic. Stay tuned for the official announcement coming soon. Thanks for joining us. At this time, the session has concluded. Please exit the webinar. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you for supporting Cultural Access Collaborative.
Credits appear. Service Dogs Welcome. Hosting guests with working animals. Presented by Cultural Access Collaborative. For workshop resources and more information, visit culturalaccesscollab.org. Presenting speakers: Carly Englander, moderator, steering committee member at Cultural Access Collaborative. Zhen Heinnemann, moderator, steering committee member at Cultural Access Collaborative. Pam Berman, Outreach Alumni Representative at Guide Dogs for the Blind. Kelley Frake, program coordinator at Great Lakes ADA Center. Workshop accessibility, efficiency reporting, real-time captioning, faith interpreting services, ASL interpretation, video editing, captioning, and audio description by BridgetMelton.com.